Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this interactive session where we want to discuss with you the Global Gateway Initiative as an opportunity for best practices in sustainable transport and energy infrastructure development. European Commission and European Union High Representatives have launched the Global Gateway. And this is a new plan to promote secure, smart, and clean connections in digital energy and transport sectors. The aim is also to strengthen the global education, health, and research systems. However, building new energy and transport infrastructures will affect wildlife populations and may promote biodiversity loss. So we are a newly formed research group based in Portugal. Our research group is Infrastructure Ecology from Biopolis CBU. We are a group of 10 members that are dedicated to protect wildlife populations from energy and transport sectors. So we are concerned about this Global Gateway initiative. This is why we decided to organize this interactive session to discuss how can European Union and also the Academy ensure no net loss and achieve net gain of biodiversity within these projects. So, Joana Bernardino, Ricardo Martins, and I, Clara Grilo, will lead this session. So only a brief introduction for about us. So we have been working on the impacts of roads on wildlife populations by ranking species that are particularly vulnerable to roads and to roadkill. We have been published also data papers where we compiled roadkill records to make it open access to everyone. I was co-editor of the Handbook of Road Ecology. Our colleagues, Joana Bernardino and Ricardo Martins are more dedicated to the research on impact of power lines on bird populations, and also other type of interactions like bird nesting on pylons. And through partnerships with the companies, they have been promoting the use of direct science through the publication of best practices guidelines to help. This is in Portuguese, maybe will be in other language later, to guide for better planning and decision making. Members of our research group also work on the wind farms, evaluating the indirect effects of wind farms on the bird populations, mainly displacement and habitat loss. And we are starting a new project next year about, it calls Risky. We will develop a web platform. It will be open access with information on wildlife mortality from energy and transport infrastructure. And we will also include analytical tools and sensitivity maps to make it open so everyone can use and to help researchers worldwide to analyze their data and get information for better planning and decision making. So I believe that you already know about the Belt and Road Initiative that is promoted by the government, Chinese government, to connect Asia and Europe through transport systems. Will be like it estimated 25 million kilometers of by 2050, and this will cross some areas that are very well conserved and where occur species that are already threatened. So, and there's this new initiative. So we wanted to start this interactive session by Joana Bernardino will begin with an overview of the Global Gateway, and then Ricardo Martins and I will talk about the main key concerns for wildlife conservation. And then we will give the floor to Bill Lawrence, that is from James Cook University in Australia, that he'll provide insights, and lessons from Belt and Road Initiative in a way to help us to avoid making the same mistakes as the Belt and Road Initiative. And then we will open the session for everyone to discuss how we can ensure no net loss and achieve net gain in biodiversity by asking you 2 questions, and then we can discuss about this topic. And then Joana Bernardino will provide the conclusions of this session. So I'll give the floor to Joana.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you all for coming. And so to give some background for our discussion, I'll do a small overview of what is the Global Gateway Initiative. I don't know how much you know about it. We had to do some research also to know more for this session. So the first step is to try to understand why this initiative was created. And we all know that we need to urgently tackle climate change and to try to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. But on top of that, the COVID pandemic and also more recently the Russia-Ukraine war show the importance of having connectivity for economic growth and resilience for our supply chains. And because of this, that we know that is estimated that we need to invest in the development of infrastructures about 13 trillion euros until 2040. But until now, and besides Road and Belt Initiative, there was no coherent strategies to develop this infrastructure in a sustainable way at a global scale. And this is why this initiative was created. So this is a European strategy to develop sustainable infrastructure for at different levels, but it includes the energy and transport sectors. It started in 2021 and it's supposed to continue until 2027. And the target countries are Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the Pacific. And to achieve this goal, they will mobilize up to 300 billion euros to invest in sustainable and high quality projects, in infrastructure projects. And who will do this? It is the European Community, European Commission, through the Team Europe approach, which is an approach that brings together the European Union states and their financial and development institutions. So until the beginning of 2024, they were already, remember that the initiative started in 21, there were already over 200 projects, flagship projects approved. Most of these projects are energy projects, almost half of it. And then we have 22% of the projects are transport projects. And they are in the continents that I've mentioned, but there are also projects in countries in the neighborhood of Europe or of the European Union. And in terms of energy infrastructure, there are many renewable projects planned. This include hydropower plants, solar plants, wind farms, green hydrogen facilities, a vast array of renewables. And with renewables, we need to expand and upgrade the existing transmission and distribution power lines. And these projects are all spread all over the target continents. In terms of transport, infrastructure, they are roads and railways, and in this case, they are more located in Africa and in Asia and South in the Pacific. But these are only the projects approved until early 2024, so many more projects are expected to be developed. So, in terms of governance, Global Gateway has a board that is composed by the president and vice president of the European Commission, and then several delegates, commissioners, and then they are supposed to give strategic guidance for Team Europe, which is the team that puts in practice the initiative. And then they have two consultative bodies. And one of these consultative bodies is the Civil Society and Local Authorities Dialogue Platform. And this platform was created to assist in Europe in ensuring that the projects are developed in a sustainable way and aligned with the principles of the initiative. But this platform, remember that the initiative started in 2021. The platform was only created in October of 23, when there were already many projects approved. And it has 57 members, and they are mostly humanitarian development institutions like the Red Cross, but they are owned two environmental ONGs, and there is no academy representative in these members so far, at least. I don't know if there is opportunity for other members to be included in this plan. So, in terms of the standards required for the development of the projects, they are supposed, in theory at least, to follow 6 key principles. And I highlighted here 3 main principles: the democratic values and high standards, which means that projects should be developed, should be sustainable, not only for local people and local economies, but also for local environment. Then we have the good governance and transparency principle, which means that there must be high levels of transparency on the selection of the projects, and also on the social, economic, and environmental benefits for the local communities, the local countries. And then we have the green and clean principle, which mostly it is that the project should be aligned with the path towards net zero emissions, but not only that, projects need to respect the do not significant harm principle, and projects need to be subject to strategic environmental assessments and EIA, environmental impact assessments. So we thought about it. How was this EIA studies, all these assessments being enforced to the project? And we tried to look for it, tried to find this information, and it was not easy because there is a transparency principle, but it was not easy to find information where there is how these EIA studies are being conducted. But what we could find is that they are being ensured through the compliance of the requirement of the financial institutions and the funding instruments. So if a project needs financing, then he has to comply with the funding, with the regulations of the financing instrument and of the funding instrument. For instance, this neighborhood development and international cooperation instrument is one of the instruments now most commonly used for financing projects outside Europe, and it has its own regulation. In Article 25, it says that major new infrastructures need to be subject to an appropriate appropriate environmental screening, and if needed, they need to be subject to IENE. So this seems the way how IENE is being forced to the global gateway projects, but it's not very clear if this is being done to every product, to being applied to every project, and if it is being enough to guarantee no net loss and ideally to reach net gains in the target countries. So to speak a little bit about the concerns for biodiversity conservation, I'll ask Ricardo and Clara to talk a little bit about it.
So, to start about this part, the key concerns for wildlife conservation. This is kind of a very simple table just to say that these are the main impacts that are known for this type of infrastructures. And of course, the main message here is just to say that how these there are a lot of shared impacts among different types of infrastructure. Of course, there are the different colors here try to represent main some differences in terms of the level of those impacts, and of course within these there are a lot of differences in terms of the wildlife groups, etc. But this is the main idea here is just to tell that how there are common impacts across these types of infrastructure. So just to mention them: mortality, habitat loss, fragmentation, habitat degradation, barrier effect. So when we cross the global gateway initiative areas around the world, and this type and the map of the threatened species, of course, we see that most of these in most of these areas there are regions with very well which still very well conserved in terms of threatened species, as we can see here in red. And of course, if we cross, and now I'm speaking about some cases, more specific cases. For instance, the group of the bustards, which are birds very vulnerable to energy transmission lines and also distribution lines in terms of collision. It's a group with a lot of endangered species, and I'm putting here basically this paper that was from the team, the bird team inside our ecology group, and together with the international specialists on the issue. And basically we showed how this group is very vulnerable to the power line impacts, and also the fact that the wire marking in general is very, very few effective. When we cross the countries where these projects are implemented, and the distribution of the species of this group, we can see that there is a lot of overlap that can be a concern here. And this is in between yellow and red, this is the number of species, of bustard species that are in the countries that in these projects can be developed. And of course, as I told, 1/3 of the bustard species are globally threatened. So now Clara will.
Okay, for this initiative, we wanted to understand how could be, well, how important is to ensure that there is no net loss. So we wanted we did some exercise. So here we use the information from this paper, Quintana et al. And colleagues, that they analyze which are the predators that are more vulnerable to roads. So we use the list of species that are vulnerable to roads, and then we overlap the distribution of these species with the countries that has the projects. And here you can see that for Angola and Zambia, there are the higher number of species that are vulnerable to roads, like more than 4 and 6 species. We also performed a literature review on roadkill surveys, and then we identify all the species that has roadkill records. So we assume that these are the species that are exposed to roadkill. So we overlap the distribution of those species that has are exposed to roadkill, and then we can see like Costa Rica, El Salvador has like more than 45 species that are exposed to roadkill, Angola and Zambia, and also countries from the Asia like Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia, with a high number of species exposed to roadkill. And also we performed a study that was published in 2021, that we ranked the species that are particularly vulnerable to mortality, to additional mortality, in this case to roadkill. So we listed the species that increased 10% of risk of extinction if 20% of the population is roadkill. So we used these species that are particularly vulnerable to roadkill, and we overlapped the distributions of with the projects, with the countries that has projects, and also Zambia and Angola are also the same, the countries that has more species there. And we wanted to show you two examples, two case studies. Lubito Corridor, that will be a railway that will be built 700 kilometers, and rehabilitation of 400 kilometers, will cross Angola, southern Congo, and north of Zambia. And when we zoom in, we can see that there are several species that are particularly vulnerable to roads. For example, leopard, caracal, and serval. Another case study is the one that comes from Guinea-Bissau to Senegal. It is across all these more than 100 kilometers. And when we zoom in, we know that there is at least 3 species, between 3, 4, 5 species that are particularly vulnerable to roads or to roadkill. And examples is the chimpanzee or the spotted hyena. So now we will give the floor to Bill Lawrence. Bill Lawrence has a vast experience on analyzing the habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, the urban sprawl, the expansion of the road network in the tropical areas, has some publications on the Belt and Road Initiative. So we would like to hear from him the experience from the Belt and Road Initiative, and try to see how can we not make the same mistakes as the Belt and Road Initiative. So I'll give the floor to Bill Lawrence.
Okay. Can you guys see my PowerPoint there? Yeah, that looks good.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Good, folks. Well, Clara, I'm ready to go then. All right. Folks, well, yeah. So thanks very much to Clara and the rest of the organizers for inviting me to talk to you guys today. It's a real pleasure. Greetings from tropical Australia, where it's wintertime here, not really that tropical. So yeah, I wanted to talk about the Belt and Road Initiative. And I realized that when I sort of putting this together yesterday and today, I realized I hadn't spoken about this in a long time, way back to pre-COVID, and it had just sort of slipped by. So there was a fair bit of things to think about and updating to do. So this is just sort of a quick snapshot type of approach to talk about the Belt and Road initiatives and some of the issues, some of the lessons that I think we would very much want to learn before launching into something like the Global Gateway Initiative. Now, I think we already heard one of our speakers talk about the fact that there's this projection that we're going to need something like 25 million kilometers of new paved roads by the middle part of this century. And that's a really quite an extraordinary number. That's enough to encircle the planet more than 600 times. And it is, along with the Belt and Road Initiative and the Global Gateway and other initiatives that are happening around the world, part and parcel of a massive avalanche of infrastructure that's happening in the world right now. So I think you all know that. So roads, trains, boats, power lines, gas lines, hydroelectric dams, energy projects, and a lot of the extractive industry projects are sort of quasi-infrastructure in that they require a lot of building and infrastructure too. So there's a big, again, this sort of avalanche of things happening in the world that we're living in right now. And it's really unprecedented. I mean, nobody has ever experienced the kind of changes that we're seeing right now. So the Belt and Road is the biggest infrastructure initiative in human history by a long ways. It looked to me like the Global Gate Initiative, in terms of the funding, would be committing about a third of what's already been spent on the Belt and Road. And there's plans, of course, to spend a lot more than that. But anyway, there's 155 nations in the Belt and Road. And you can see here lots of nations in Africa, lots in Europe and the Middle East, lots in Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and also increasingly in Latin America and the Caribbean, New Zealand also. In fact, the Australian state of Victoria, I think, has also signed up for the Belt and Road. So gigantic initiative, really unprecedented in scope in terms of what it's doing and what it's trying to do. Now, the Belt and Road was hit very hard by COVID, like many other human endeavors, and things really did slow down. The Chinese investment had been very high. I'm not sure just what the annual figure was, but very substantial investments were happening year in and year out. But once COVID hit, China's investments in the Belt and Road really did drop off quite a lot, and things slowed down, although they're picking it back up again. So that's what we want to talk about a little bit here. A couple of things that are happening, and there's lots of things happening. You can imagine with an initiative this big and this complex and involving this many different nations and parties, there's just an awful lot happening. But one of the things is that Chinese President Xi Jinping is really focusing on Africa as a new development frontier. So there's a lot of Chinese investment pouring into Africa right now, many different African states. And the same thing with the Russians too, actually. So both Russian and Chinese parties are investing in Africa really at an unprecedented rate right now. So there's a lot of different projects. Now, this can be problematic, of course. One example of many different environmental concerns that are arising from the Belt and Road in China has been poaching of ivory from elephants and also rhino horn and lots of other things too. I mean, including things like some of the trees, the bloodwood trees. There are many, many different species and types of organisms that are being exploited very often illegally. And in fact, Chinese diplomats have been implicated a number of times now in transporting illegal wildlife products to Asia, usually to China, in diplomatic pouches. And a diplomatic pouch, by the way, you probably know this, is not just a pouch. It can be a gigantic crate. So there's been a number of cases of this that have happened. So long ongoing problem with this sort of a level of aggressive development happening in a place like Africa, which doesn't necessarily have the infrastructure and the institutions and the training of its people in order to try to address some of these issues very effectively. There's been a big push. Another trend has been a big push into Latin America and the Caribbean region. One of the things, and again, this is just one example of many one could pick, but there's a lot of concern about jaguars, which of course live in the New World in the Amazon and in Latin America region. Jaguars are being hit very, very hard by poachers now because Chinese Chinese illegal wildlife shippers are paying prime prices for jaguar skins and pelts and skeletons and skulls and other tissues. And so poaching has really increased in concert with new roads and new infrastructure that are now penetrating into remote forest areas, even more so than they had been occurring before. So this is, again, just sort of one of these emblematic kinds of issues that people have been talking about. That's quite a big concern. So there's a lot of worries or concerns or lessons about the Belt and Road I think we could try to identify. And I'm just going to try to hit a few sort of highlights here and talk, maybe back up a little bit and give you a bit of context on that, when the Belt and Road evolved initially. So when the BRI was first proposed by Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, they anticipated that they would run into quite a lot of resistance, and that some of the resistance would come from environmental concerns, some would come from social concerns, that type of thing. So there was sort of an avalanche of rain of policy documents that came out along with the early versions of the Belt and Road. There were green credits, environmental, social guidelines, and it was all very much embodied in a sustainable philosophy according to the way it was being framed. In fact, that's not really what's happened. The Belt and Road, in many cases, I think would be regarded as one of the most serious environmental projects in terms of its impacts. And this has sort of evolved because of this perfect storm in China. I mean, you have this ruler, Xi Jinping, who's now effectively leader for life. China, of course, has closed media. It has closed social media. People talk about the Great Firewall, not just the Great Wall, the Great Firewall. Of course, very difficult for Chinese nationals to communicate freely on various issues, and they certainly don't hear hardly anything that's critical of the government. There's very little tolerance in China of domestic criticism for Chinese citizens. And the BRI came in under Xi Jinping, and it was incorporated immediately into the Chinese Communist Party, into its charter. And that means that it is actually illegal in China for any Chinese national to criticize it, because they would then be criticizing the Central Party itself, the Communist Party itself. So you're asking about things not to do. My God, don't do that. You need to have open discourse, and people need to be able to debate and discuss and disclose things. And the Belt and Road has had very much the opposite approach right from its genesis. China is absolutely hostile to international criticism. They react very strongly. And the Belt and Road is the signature program of President Xi Jinping, again, China's leader for life. So there's so many things that are stacked up right now and this is one of the things that makes me most nervous about the Belt and Road, is this kind of lack of transparency, both externally to countries outside of China, and internally for people inside China, in order to try to understand what's going on. And you'll find some Chinese nationals I've met have an amazing level of dogmatism about China and about what China does. And it's almost as though, they're incapable of fault. And that's just silly. So some more worries about the Belt and Road. It's less organized than a lot of people realize. I have a Chinese colleague who knows some of the internal workings, and he said it's just chaos inside. I don't know if everybody thinks that, but he did. There's lots of big projects. In fact, one of the characteristics of the Belt and Road is large multinational projects. And logistically, they can be really complex. So, cross-national projects, you got lots of funders, you got lots of different organizations and government entities that are responsible for environmental issues and for planning and for, disbursement of funding and all these different kinds of things. So it gets very complex. There's no single entity in charge. If there's an environmental problem or social problem or reputational problem, there's really no single entity responsible for it. So that's not a good situation. And just generally speaking, there's lots and lots of worries in the Belt and Road around financing issues and environment issues. And financing has been an increasingly big part of the concerns around the Belt and Road. There hasn't been a consensus inside China about what the eco guidelines should be. There's been kind of a distinction between big companies. And when I say big companies, I mean, these are foreign companies in China that would be listed on foreign stock exchanges, and also potentially vulnerable to measures from foreign governments if they were unhappy with China's policies or something that China did. So the big companies, generally speaking, want to keep all those overseas countries happy. So they want more strict guidelines because they know that people in the world are worried about the environment and biodiversity. So they want somewhat stricter guidelines. But the smaller companies, of which there's many, many, many thousands of smaller and medium-sized companies, many of which are very actively involved in the Belt and Road, they don't want that at all. They want the loosest guidelines possible because they don't care about what international people think, just because that's their company is not built that way. So one of the things that's evolved as a result of this is, given this fact that there's so many, probably thousands of smaller companies participating in the Belt and Road, I think it makes it extremely unlikely that the Chinese government will favor stronger control over overseas operators. I've been working in many of the places around the world where the Belt and Road is happening, and I haven't seen anything that would convince me otherwise from that. I just don't see much, if any, control coming from the Chinese government. Another thing that really one has to realize is that the China's corporate culture is just profoundly different from what we're used to in the West, where corporations are quite open with their earnings and their profits and their losses and their all the statements, and when they list themselves on a major stock exchange, you have to know their assets, you have to know what they're doing, where they're investing, and it just doesn't work like that in China. The companies there are not used to that. It's not in their culture. It's not built into them really at all. So you have this lack of financial transparency, big problem. Transparency International, which is you probably know, is a German NGO that does a lot of work on corruption and misuse of funding around the world. Excuse me. Here's what they said: no investigations, pardon me. No investigations or charges have ever been laid in China against its companies, citizens, or residents for foreign corrupt practices. In other words, to the Chinese companies, bribe away, it's okay. And bribery is very much in their culture. It happens domestically in China. It has been a massive problem domestically in China in the past, and it also occurs a great deal overseas. Chinese corporations are kind of known. The reputation from them is that they tend to come in and they tend to go straight to the minister or the president or somebody very high ranking and bribe them, and then not worry about bribing everybody beneath them. And that also makes a lot of the rank and file people just living out in the normal people, makes them very upset because they don't feel like they're profiting at all from China being there. So anyway, this is a very, very serious problem, especially in developing nations, which is where much of the Belt and Road initiative is concentrated, and where, by the way, we're currently seeing something like maybe 90% of all infrastructure development happening in developing nations and middle and lower income nations. So one of the things that also happens as a consequence of this corruption issues are just scandals, and we've seen some horrible ones. One of the worst has been about a $5 billion scandal in Malaysia, where the former president, Najib, has been arrested, and I believe he's still in prison over this massive scandal. And there's been all kinds of people involved in this, not purposely, just accidentally. So here's Najib. Here's, of course, Leonardo DiCaprio. Anyway, I don't care who she is. But the bottom line is this. It is not a good situation, and it arose directly as a result of the Belt and Road. And what China did with Malaysia was they came in and they said to Malaysia, tell us what big projects you want. And then they lent them the money so that Malaysia could then turn around and pay Chinese companies and Chinese engineers and Chinese construction companies and all that to build those projects. It was primarily a fast railway and a major pipeline project. And then Najib dipped into that and stole about $5 billion, which he secreted into bank accounts overseas. So, when you're talking about massive investments like this, and you're talking about an entity like China and Chinese corporations, I think you're looking at the potential for a lot of problem. People, in terms of financial issues, also, people have talked about debt traps and concerns about that. It turns out that there's quite a debate about this in the literature, and some people claim that the debt traps are not as bad as people have said. Others that they are indeed that bad. And so what a debt trap is China has been accused of lending money to poorer countries. And then when that country can't pay back its debt, China then goes in and seizes critical natural resources, like it might be timber areas, it might be mineral resources. And in the case of Sri Lanka, what China has got now is, as I understand it, is sort of carte blanche title and access long-term to Hambantota Harbor, which is Sri Lanka's best, primarily its main deep water port. So ideal for warships and other types of military hardware. And it's certainly making people, along with commercial ships, and it's certainly making a lot of people in the region very nervous. But anyway, Sri Lanka has defaulted on much of its debt, and this loss of title to the temporary loss of title to the harbor is a consequence. And in a broader sense, one of the things that we've been seeing is that China's debt has been increasing a lot. And if we look at the, for instance, foreign debt to GDP ratio, you can see here, that's what really makes economists nervous, is when that starts building up. But that soaring debt and the risk in China is creating a lot of concerns. So China's, I believe their investment more recently in the Belt and Road has dropped off because China's been struggling with a lot of internal financial risk issues in terms of having problems in their private sector. Their housing market is very high risk. They've got a lot of default. I think their property market in general is just in a lot of problems. So there's high default risks when this type of thing could happen with China, and China's escalating risk could potentially risk global shocks and recession. There could actually be a default from an individual nation as a result of this. There would be a default from China as a result of this burgeoning debt risk. Now, a final thing to remember here, of course, is that much of what China is doing with the Belt and Road is closely linked with China's geopolitical goals. And they are ambitious, and especially in the Pacific region, they are very ambitious. And for example, the port that we just talked about in Sri Lanka is an example of a case where China appears to be trying to expand its military assets in the region. China is increasingly being seen as a bully boy in the region. There's a lot of Chinese investment and effort in South Pacific island nations, for instance, to get them to stop recognizing the nation of Taiwan. And there's a great deal of money and a great deal of sort of bullying that's been going on to try to have that happening. But also Chinese investments are being used as a carrot to try to attract these nations into doing what China wants it to do, especially with regard to Taiwan. And of course, as you surely all know, there's an enormous amount of tension in the South China Sea right now, with China claiming ownership of much of that region, which would overlap with the Philippines, parts of New Guinea, parts of Borneo, parts of Southeast Asia, and with countries like Vietnam, Philippines, and various others, Japan, Taiwan, others in that region. And China is, increasingly becoming aggressive about this. And I think that one has to understand is that these are all part, because the Belt and Road is part of the Chinese Communist Party, and because China's plans under Xi Jinping are very much a product of the Chinese Communist Party. I think you have to see these as very much integrated geopolitical programs in addition to something that's trying to promote development. China does not for even a moment forget about China's own self-interests. So thank you for giving me a chance to talk about that. It's probably a little bit scattered, but it's a pleasure to talk to you, and I'll happily take questions later on. See you. Thank you, folks.
Right. Thank you, Bill, for this explanation about the Belt and Road Initiative. Does anyone have any questions while we will switch? Yeah.
Hi, Lavinia Paramal from South Africa. I find it very interesting. First, I'm needing a little bit more clarity on this global gateway project or flagship. If we are building roads and infrastructure projects, and it is predominantly built by Chinese investors, and then we are saying that this is a project by the EU team in predominantly countries outside of the EU, so African countries, for example. But I'm not really seeing any inclusion of any African collaborators and partners. So I'm wondering how this global, if the job here of this flagship project is to really guide practices and principles for how we mitigate the effects. Is it just an EU team that prepares these guidelines for the projects? And if these projects are in countries outside of Africa, where are the Africans? And also, I'm hearing a lot about. I'm going to say this lightly, but it almost seems as if the problem is not the road itself. It's all the issues around the roads and the politics that are the concern. So I'm just needing some clarity where this global gateway flagship project sits. If it's EU, are they preparing guidelines for how we build roads in Africa? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Are you looking? I didn't think I would answer that question because I thought she asked about the global gateway, which I thought someone there, maybe Clara, would be better able to answer. In terms of the road thing, the comment she just said, it seems like it's all the stuff around the road as much or more than the road itself. Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, those are what we call secondary impacts of roads. So roads that open an area up and there's primary impacts, and then you get a whole bunch of lateral roads and hunting, and you get logging and illegal mining, illegal drug production, all kinds of things. And that's all these secondary impacts. And yeah, the road itself is one thing, but it's all the other knock-on effects that are typically the most damaging.
Okay, thank you, Bill. We invite you to join our 2 questions to answer to open the discussion. So the idea is to talk about this because there is a lot of lack of knowledge about this, and how can we recommend the European Union to improve and not make the same mistakes like this lack of transparency. So we'll move to the questions. Ricardo will talk about the questions, and then you can answer with the Mentimeter. Can you close the sharing, your presentation, please?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
So basically here to start this discussion, so how to ensure the net loss and achieving a net gain of biodiversity within the Global Gate initiative, we launch 2 main questions. The first one is how can the EU ensure and the European Commission ensure high environmental standards for Global Gate projects? And here these 2 questions are the same that were launched by email to the attendees of the conference in the beginning. I don't know if some of you also participated in the Google Forms. Afterwards, we will talk about those results also. But of course, here is something different. We will launch these questions here in this interactive session, and after we will invite you to answer those questions through the Mentimeter. So that's the part of interactive thing that we try to do. But basically are only 2 questions, and this is the first one. We set here 10 hypotheses, and we ask people basically to select 4 actions, which in Mentimeter will appear as a rank, but don't worry about that part. Basically are 10 possible answers organized here in EIA practices. One thing is to improve baseline information, to develop a robust framework to continuous monitoring and reporting of environmental impacts, to support research and development initiatives focused on innovative biodiversity assessment methods and tools. Another thing, facilitate, assess, and transfer advanced technologies and tools for biodiversity assessment, and related with policy and legislation to enforce existing EU legislation like the CEA and EIA, mechanisms for periodic review and update of environmental standards. This is something that is related with the to all the system. We can, if there are doubts, dip a little bit more in these choices, and related with public participation, foster collaboration between public administration and other stakeholders, with the objective to share insights and develop comprehensive environmental strategies, to increase the public involvement in this kind of assessments, and of course, last but not least, to provide training programs and resources for professionals involved in environmental assessments. Here we will pass now to the interactive part with where we will invite you to, in your mobile, if you want, of course, it's not mandatory, don't worry. So you can use the QR code or go to your internet browser, menti.com, and just put the code. Please tell us if you are. We can follow directly. Oh, we are seeing likes there. Sorry, yeah, we have to do something. You are right. So the rank that appears there is just the rank, the initial rank. So you will not be influenced by that. We know that most of the questions, this is a bit subjective, of course, and there is we have the tendency to see them as everything is important, but try to pick up and choose 4, the main. Oops, we are seeing right now something that can influence the. So it's really interactive, but try not to be influenced by the already. Don't look at the screen. You can, of course.
Times, okay?
I think this is how many answers we have. So it's a good sample for the size of the number of people that we have in the room. So it's the large majority. So, okay, it's officially closed the votations. So the first one goes to the provide training and resources for professionals involved. Okay. The second one, foster collaboration between public administrations, NGOs, consultants. That was mine. Develop robust framework for continuous monitoring and reporting for environmental impacts. Fourth, improve baseline information to improve the quality of the studies, of course. Increase public involvement and CIA in fifth place. And then we can, well, highlight these 5 from the others, but the others were enforce the existing UI legislation, then establish a mechanism for periodic review, facilitate, assess, transfer advanced technologies, and the last one to support research and development initiatives focused on innovative biodiversity assessments. So, yeah, this is the part where we want your feedback. We would like to see what you felt about the well, the questions, other comments, criticisms. So we have here 3.
Yeah. Hi. I wanted to add to what she was saying earlier. Is there a way to, I mean, is this strict? Is there a way to maybe, is it flexible to like provide training and resources, maybe expand it to include people working in that areas, from the beginning, instead of providing training to them at, say, maybe a later stage or something like that? Like foster collaboration said towards the end to share insights. So that I assume comes towards the end of the process. But wouldn't it be better to collaborate with local academics from the get-go? So I hope this is like flexible if it can include people working in those regions from the beginning. Maybe it would be a better for the project as well.
Yeah.
Well, you were saying that we should promote including the researchers from there to be trained and train the others too.
Researchers, public servants, whoever's involved in the whole process, I think they should have an equitable role in the whole thing instead of being provided training, being provided insights later on, things like that.
Thank you.
I put in first the collaboration because what I understood in your presentation is that at the beginning there is just 2 NGO in the global network. Yes,
There are several NGOs, but they are mostly humanitarian and regional development NGOs, not dedicated to environmental topics, just to dedicated to environment.
Yes, so they can do whatever they want. So about environment, there is no rules at all. So I think the more collaboration, the more those collaboration will be in the global gateway, then there will be more transparency because there will be more pressure to have transparency at the beginning, and then it's important to have environmental rules and everything like that. If there is no control at all by anyone, well, yeah, right.
So about 2 or 3 years ago, my organization did a similar research project where we looked at 12 focal BRI countries. And as part of that, we were looking into case studies where we interviewed folks within each of those countries. We did about 4 per country. And by and large, chatting with these folks, the biggest thing that we continued to come across was at least in the case of the BRI, it seems by and large, they were just aligning with national policies for environmental assessments. So it was completely up to them, like what guidance they were following. So within that specific country, they were allowed to follow their national guidance, which in a lot of cases was very loose. And it seemed for the most part that the consultants being hired on to run those EIA processes were very often students that had just left their bachelor's degree with an environmental license, and they were given very little information on how to properly run an EIA assessment. And it would be very limited engagement with local communities. They would say, we talked to folks in the Kajiado region in Kenya, but they had only gone to one township and engaged with one elder, and were representing that as representing an entire region. So they were having really minimal touch points. And by and large, it seems like most of this was due to lack of proper education. So that's, providing the true training programs and resources to really bring whoever is being hired up to speed, because it does seem more often than not, in the case of the BRI, from my understanding, that it was nationals being brought on.
Okay, thank you, Melissa.
I'm an ecological consultant in the UK. What underpins what we do is the legislation and policy, so particularly around EIA, SEA. I put number 6, the one that's 6th there at the top, because it basically underpins all of the other things you've got there. You can dictate how much collaboration is required. I mean, the standards that International Monetary Fund, the World Banks, they have their own sets of policies that they have to be adhered to. You could set something so it aligns with what you want for the European Union beyond what we've currently got. But what we already have is a pretty good basis of what we should be expecting from those projects.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as well, what really underpins good execution of these assessments is to increase public involvement, to increase training, and to foster collaboration, just in terms of manpower on the ground to actually do proper assessments. There's no way there's going to be enough people from, anyway, they shouldn't come from Europe to do these assessments on the ground. But in order to actually have local people doing this, when I see really good monitoring programs, it involves local NGOs who have people who know the land. And I really agree with what you said before. I think to have NGOs involved later and kind of giving them insights, it sounds a bit like fake engagement to me. It should be really from the beginning, so that there's some kind of ownership and really meaningful joint planning. So throughout,
Can I just add one quickly? I'm still a bit confused about, are we saying we're developing, the EU is developing high environmental standards, for the projects that are going to be implemented, for example, in the DRC or Angola, or so is it the EU now is providing a guideline for the project that's being developed in the EU? I mean, in Angola. And so if we are then talking about providing the training and about developing the robust frameworks, who then, is it the EU that is developing this? Or are we saying that Angola should be developing this? Because in my experience from what I'm hearing at this conference is a lot of very like wildlife mortality, for example. And the context in Africa and the concerns, I think Bill has raised this, but it's very contextual, like the land use, the roads facilitating land use change is a big problem. But for that, we don't have sufficient baseline information to actually evidence of what roads can actually do in Africa. So I'm just a bit confused about if the EU is developing these things, who are you training? Who is what, like, are we saying that the EU is developing the guidelines, the SEAs, the EIA standards, enforcing EU legislation onto a project in Angola? I'm just a bit like confused about the EU's role in the projects and the things we build in Africa.
This is why we wanted a discussion, how the EU has the investment and how can EU can also promote high environmental standards, like funding projects that create baseline information training, or trying to force that the countries do that, could be different ways of thinking. So this is what we want to hear from you guys. Any comments?
Yeah. Just about this enforcing of the EU legislations, a bit of clarity and also a little input about. So when we have World Bank or other ADB projects in India, they have their own set of environmental regulations that they would like their projects to follow. But as a country, we also have certain parameters. We have clearances to be got. So how does this work? Is it only the EU system of SEAs or EIAs, or is it a coalition of both EU, the funding partner, and the implementing country? Their legislation, does it work together, or is it just that? If you could just comment on it.
No, this is a good point. Should be only European Union doing this, or is in a coalition and try to improve the standards, with communication and collaboration with the countries?
Yeah. So like I said, local imperatives can be different. Maybe the EU legislation, as perfect as it may be, may not consider certain local regional conservation imperatives. So maybe that kind of local lens is required. And it may be project specific, country specific, region specific. So it is very important to look at the local legislations, the conservation regimes, the practices, and not just go with a single-minded, that we need to follow EU practices in these countries.
Okay.
No. That's what I'm saying. It needs to be. No, so certainly developing countries don't have the best policies. Sometimes it's not iterative. We don't, just learn with the times. It's very difficult to update policies and laws. So I think it would be good to bring the two together. If in a country something is lacking, that can be made up by the EU, to support that, right?
Yeah. No, this is a great point. Yeah. Anyone wants to, or we move to the other question because we have 15 minutes. So we move to the other question. It's more about the.
I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't say. I thought it was just monitor those. All right. Let me go.
I have a question. Why do you mean that our practice is best. Why do you mean that that our practice is best?
No. I didn't. I never said that. I think it's a good opportunity to improve because I think what we have been doing is like no net loss, and we want not only ensure no net loss and achieve net gain. And we have to push in that way. So we have to improve our standards and work with the countries. But this is open discussion. We don't know. We don't know the solutions.
Now, this is the second question. So this is more focused on how can academia support the EU in ensuring the no net loss and achieving a net gain, if possible, of biodiversity in the Global Gate initiative. And here we selected 8 possibilities. And of course, there are many ideas that are shared with the other question, but here the focus is more on how the knowledge can be used in this context with these goals. So to develop baseline information through comprehensive platforms that including like examples is ranking of vulnerable species to infrastructures, sensitivity mapping, other kind of examples here mentioned. Create best practices guidelines through recommendations for baseline surveys, impact assessment, etc. Designing robust frameworks for analytic tools to improve accuracy and effectiveness of environmental assessments. And other point is participate actively in environmental assessment teams to provide expert insights and rigorous analysis. Promote training capacity building initiatives is a bit related with the other one. The seventh, to encourage and exchange. This is more kind of, students and professors between countries to foster international collaboration, knowledge sharing, and the last one, conduct thorough validation of current assessments, monitoring and mitigation practices, something that this is basically an idea of someone in the academia can accompany and follow the contents that are done. So here we have to pass here to the Mentimeter.
Okay.
And I think here you have to follow the next question. And I think now in the app, you have already assessed to these questions. And now this one is just select 3 instead of 4, because they are only, I said 8. Okay, there was the others. We already have 11 people. So I think everybody still want to finish the voting, or everybody's Okay, so we have a result. Nice graph. So it seems that the creation of best practices guidelines won. Really important. Also participate actively in environmental assessment teams. Develop baseline information. I can say that these three highlighted a bit than as compared with the other options, but it is still with some importance, of course, to encourage the exchange of students and professors, design robust frameworks and analytical tools, and the two less voted conducting thorough validation, promote training and capacity building initiatives. Now I would like to ask if about these answers and this about with these objectives someone wants to add and put comments on. So go ahead if you have some points to add, please, to enrich the discussion.
Just quickly, I mean, I agree that best practice guidelines are super important, but also it's not always going to be relevant to the context, species specific, ecosystem specific. So I'd encourage that if there's going to be best practice guidelines, they should be again built with people on the ground who know which species, the impact of local infrastructure. And I say the same thing runs for all of them, in my opinion. Like whatever is done, it needs to be with local stakeholders from the beginning.
Yeah, it's a good input, and as the same as were raised before, but many times here we are not saying that the best practices or the answer is not that close. The idea is not to say that to create best practices guidelines at the level of the EU that should be applied to every country. It's the idea that they can be best practices for specific realities of a group of species that are not in Europe at all. That's the idea. Or it's not closed. It is an idea that includes all the cities.
I only would like to add a comment. When we say academy, it's not academy only from Europe. It's academy there too. So working together and see how can, ensure no net loss and achieve the net gain. We can
So the UK, I bent Liam's ear about this yesterday, but the UK is currently going through biodiversity net gain transition. And I think critically, I know you've got no net loss and net gain here, but this seems to be interchanging dialogue around whether that's species related or habitats related. So really clear distinction of what you're wanting to get net gains in, whether that is habitats, because that's going to provide probably better results for all species. There's a couple of other things that I've written down here. There needs to be emphasis, and this probably ties back to that EIA point on the mitigation hierarchy. So avoid, then mitigate, then compensate. Biodiversity net gain and the use of a metric is a really good way to try and achieve those long-term compensation gain. I think the other point, so in the UK, we also have a gain hierarchy. So the biodiversity net gains need to be firstly sought on site before looking at off-site options. And that's really critical, I think, to any kind of implementation of no net loss or net gain.
Yeah, thanks for the contribution here.
Just, sorry, quickly. I think it's the way we're phrasing the question that is the problem. It's like we're saying it's basically to support the EU to do this. And actually what we're saying is we're wanting to address biodiversity loss and those other big things, and the EU is, maybe one part of it. But the one, just to add on that, I think something that would be useful for the role of academia is to identify the priorities for research and for evidence that is needed in those specific areas. So what evidence is actually needed, and using local universities to kind of strengthen that base.
I can just add that here the idea, I think, is to, because of the initiative, this initiative is coming from the EU. The objective is how to raise, if we think, and because, and of course there is a lack of information, as Rana told, how the process is being implemented, so on. But the idea here is to ensure at the level of the promoters of the initiative what should be done to avoid the mistakes that of the Belt and Road Initiative. So, but starting from that, but then reaching that concerns also to involve local academia, local professionals, etc.
I think that create best practical guidelines is the same strategy as China. We can see it's the same strategy as China strategy. Good practice guidelines. You can see make before presentation from Australia, as you can see, China is made. Yes.
Of course, but yeah, but of course the best practices guidelines are particularly useful when there are no information on but of course the rest of the process it is to how to implement those things. I agree in the point that we can have good things on the paper, but nothing happens. If that is the criticism. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if Bill Lawrence is still online. I don't think so. Maybe it's time to sleep there. So we have, a few minutes, so we can close the session with main conclusion. Joanna is finishing.
Just for curiosity, we launched that poll before, and the results were, some were similar to the audience that we had here. They also stressed the importance of training, collaboration among stakeholders in the first question, but the need to enforce EIA and legislation, but they put more focus also in the research and the development of robust framework for monitoring and reporting. In the second question, it was some similar also, capacity building, the best practices and baseline information were the responses most with more votes. So they're similar, but some differences here. So I will try to summarize the main ideas that were discussed here, and these are what I took, some key messages and key recommendations that I took for European Commission. So for sure that promote capacity building and training among the local environmental professionals seems important. I think we all, in both questions, this was mentioned. Then we have, for sure, also to foster collaboration between stakeholders and involve also, of course, taking in consideration all the entities in the local countries, the target countries, enforce legislation, EIA in strategic environmental legislation. Like you've mentioned, it's important for countries that have loose legislation. It's important to take in consideration the European legislations, but we never can forget the specific requirements and the legislation of the local countries, of the target countries. I mean, it doesn't mean that our legislation in Europe is the best one. In academy, and not only can help with creating best practice guidelines to develop robust assessments, to implement mitigation hierarchy and monitoring adapted to the specific circumstances of the target countries. And the final two ideas that I took is that academia can certainly engage in environmental assessments and try to facilitate exchanges with local professionals and students and professors, so they can then have impact on the studies and the work that is being done on the field. And there is a lack of information, baseline information, and that we in academia and not only can also help here, providing this baseline information, but also helping local professionals and academia to developing these studies and baseline information. So we would like to thank your participation, and Clara will finish with some ideas.
Okay, thank you very much. I passed the paper for you to fill in the names and the contact, because we want to prepare a document with this information and that we talked, and we would like to share with you and then send or present to the European Union. We contacted the Director of International Partnerships to be part of this session. They were not available, but they were available to know the conclusions of this session. So the idea is we prepare a document of 1 page, we share with you, and then if you want, you comment and add something that we missed in the session, and then we will have this meeting with the director of the international partnerships, and well, I hope we can push something better than before this session. Okay, thank you very much. Do you want to comment anything?
I wanted to ask what you said now. So you answer my question before I ask it.
Okay, so good. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.